The dust cloud rising behind the stagecoach should have been her first warning that something was terribly wrong, but Sarah Whitmore had been too distracted by the heat shimmering off the red rocks of Apache territory to notice the driver's increasingly nervous glances toward the horizon. It was August 1882, and the journey from Fort Worth to Santa Fe had already taken 3 grueling days when the driver suddenly pulled the horses to a stop in the middle of nowhere, turned to her with eyes full of fear and guilt, and said words that would haunt her for years to come. "Miss, I'm real sorry, but I can't take you no further. There's been Apache raids up ahead, and I got a wife and 3 children waiting for me back in Enid. I'm turning back right now." Sarah's throat went dry as she looked around at the endless expanse of rocky desert stretching in every direction. "But you cannot just leave me here. There is nothing for miles." The driver was already unhitching her trunk from the back of the coach, his hands shaking as he worked. "You got water for 2 days if you're careful. Stay put, and another stage might come through in a week or so, or maybe some travelers will find you. I'm sorry, miss, but I got to think of my own family." Before she could protest further, before she could beg or reason with him, he had climbed back onto the driver's seat and snapped the reins. The stagecoach lurched forward, wheels churning up dust that made her cough and cover her face. Within minutes, it was nothing more than a distant speck on the horizon, and then it was gone entirely. Sarah stood alone in the vast emptiness of the New Mexico territory, her trunk at her feet, a canteen of water in her trembling hands, and the afternoon sun beating down on her dark blue traveling dress like a hammer on an anvil. She was 23 years old, had been traveling to Santa Fe to become a school teacher, and now found herself abandoned in one of the most dangerous stretches of land in the entire American West. The first hour passed in a kind of stunned disbelief. She sat on her trunk and waited, convinced that the driver would come to his senses and return for her. But as the sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that might have been beautiful under different circumstances, reality settled over her like a heavy blanket. No one was coming back for her. She was truly alone. By the time darkness fell, Sarah had gathered what courage she could muster and made a small camp beside a cluster of rocks that offered some protection from the wind. She did not dare light a fire, knowing that smoke could be seen for miles and might attract exactly the kind of attention she wanted to avoid. Instead, she wrapped herself in the one shawl she had pulled from her trunk and tried to ignore the strange sounds of the desert at night, the howling of distant coyotes and the rustling of creatures she could not see. Sleep came in fitful bursts, and when dawn finally broke across the landscape, Sarah was exhausted, terrified, and beginning to understand just how dire her situation truly was. She had water for perhaps 2 days if she was careful, no food beyond a small package of crackers that had already grown stale, and absolutely no idea which direction might lead to safety. The second day was worse than the first. The heat was relentless, and by noon she had retreated into the shade of the rocks, using her trunk as a makeshift seat while she tried to conserve her energy. She took tiny sips from her canteen, rationing the water as carefully as she knew how, but even so she could feel the level dropping with alarming speed. Her lips were already beginning to crack, and her skin felt tight and hot despite the shade. It was late afternoon when she first saw the dust cloud on the horizon. Her heart leapt with hope, but caution kept her from rushing forward immediately. She had heard too many stories about what could happen to a woman alone in Apache territory, stories that made her blood run cold even in the desert heat. She waited, watching as the cloud grew closer until finally she could make out the shape of a single rider on horseback. Relief and fear warred within her as the rider approached. She stood slowly, smoothing down her dusty skirts with hands that shook slightly, and waited to see whether salvation or doom was riding toward her across the red earth. The man who reined his horse to a stop 20 feet away was not what she had expected. He was tall, with broad shoulders, and sun-darkened skin that spoke of countless hours spent outdoors. His hat was pulled low over his face, casting shadows that made it difficult to read his expression. But when he pushed it back and looked at her directly, Sarah found herself staring into the bluest eyes she had ever seen. They were the color of a winter sky, startling against his tanned face, and they held a mixture of surprise and concern that made something in her chest ease slightly. "Madam," he said, his voice rough but not unkind, "what in God's name are you doing out here alone?" "The stagecoach driver left me," Sarah said, and was mortified when her voice cracked on the last word. "2 days ago. He said there were Apache raids ahead and he had to turn back." The man's jaw tightened, and something dark flashed across his face. "That yellow-bellied coward. Pardon my language, madam, but there's no excuse for leaving a woman stranded in the middle of Apache territory." He swung down from his horse with practiced ease and approached her slowly, as if afraid she might bolt like a frightened animal. "My name is Xavier Dalton. I've got a ranch about 30 miles south of here, and I've been tracking a couple of stray cattle that wandered off during a storm last week. How much water do you have left?" "Maybe enough for another day," Sarah admitted. "I have been trying to be careful." Xavier's expression grew more serious. "We need to get you out of here. Apache scouts have been spotted in this area, and while most of them are peaceful enough if you leave them alone, there are still war parties that don't take kindly to settlers on what they consider their land." He glanced at her trunk. "Can you ride?" "I have ridden before, but not recently," Sarah said. "And what about my belongings?" "We'll have to leave the trunk. I can come back for it later with a wagon, assuming it's still here. Right now, the priority is getting you somewhere safe before nightfall." He was already moving back to his horse, untying a bedroll and some supplies from behind his saddle. "I've got enough water and food for both of us for a few days, and I know these lands well enough to keep us out of trouble if we're smart about it." Sarah looked at her trunk, at all her worldly possessions packed carefully inside, and then back at Xavier Dalton. She did not know this man, had no reason to trust him beyond the honest concern she saw in his eyes, but she also knew she had no other choice. Staying here meant certain death, whether from thirst, exposure, or something worse. "All right," she said quietly. "I will go with you." Xavier nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement, and held out his hand to help her approach the horse. "What's your name, madam?" "Sarah Whitmore. I was traveling to Santa Fe to take a position as a school teacher." "Well, Miss Whitmore, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure you get there safe and sound. But first, we need to get you to my ranch where you can rest and recover. It's a hard ride, and we'll need to travel through the night to avoid the worst of tomorrow's heat. Can you manage that?" Sarah looked up at the horse, which seemed impossibly tall from where she stood, and then back at Xavier. His blue eyes were steady and calm, and something about his presence made her feel safer than she had since the moment the stagecoach had disappeared over the horizon. "I can manage," she said, and was proud when her voice came out strong and certain. Xavier helped her mount the horse, and then swung up behind her with a fluid grace that spoke of years spent in the saddle. Sarah could feel the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the strength in the arms that reached around her to hold the reins, and despite the strangeness of the situation, despite everything she had been taught about proper behavior and maintaining distance from men she barely knew, she found herself leaning back against him slightly, drawing comfort from his steady presence. They rode through the afternoon and into the evening, following paths that only Xavier seemed able to see through the rocky desert landscape. He pointed out landmarks as they went, teaching her to read the land the way he did, showing her which plants held water and which ones would make her sick, which rock formations meant they were heading in the right direction, and which ones signaled danger. "You learn to read the desert or it kills you," he explained as the sun set in a blaze of color that took Sarah's breath away despite her exhaustion. "Every rock, every plant, every shadow tells you something if you know how to listen." "How long have you lived out here?" Sarah asked, genuinely curious despite her fatigue. "My whole life, more or less. My father brought our family out here when I was 10 years old, determined to make his fortune ranching. He died 5 years later when a horse threw him and he broke his neck. And I've been running the ranch ever since. That was 12 years ago now." Sarah did the mental calculation and realized Xavier must be around 27, just 4 years older than herself. He seemed older somehow, worn by the harsh realities of desert life in a way that added gravitas to his features. That must have been terribly difficult, taking on such responsibility so young. "It was what needed to be done," Xavier said simply. "My mother had already passed during the journey west, and my younger sister needed someone to look after her. The ranch was all we had, so I learned to make it work." "You have a sister?" "Had. Emma died of fever 3 winters ago. It was just after her 18th birthday." Xavier's voice was carefully neutral, but Sarah could hear the old grief buried beneath the words. "Now it's just me and a couple of ranch hands who help with the cattle and horses." They fell into silence after that, and Sarah found herself thinking about this man who had lost so much but kept going, who had taken on the responsibilities of a full-grown man while still practically a boy himself. There was a strength to him that went beyond mere physical capability, a quiet resilience that she found herself admiring despite the strange circumstances of their meeting. As night deepened around them, Xavier kept the horse moving at a steady pace, guiding them by starlight and some internal compass that Sarah could not fathom. She dozed occasionally, jerking awake each time she started to slip sideways, until finally Xavier said quietly, "It's all right. You can rest against me if you need to. I won't let you fall." Sarah hesitated only a moment before allowing herself to relax fully against his chest. The last thing she remembered before exhaustion claimed her completely was the steady rhythm of Xavier's heartbeat against her back, and the feeling of his arm tightening slightly around her waist, holding her secure. She woke to the sound of voices speaking in low tones, and the realization that the horse had stopped moving. Blinking sleep from her eyes, Sarah looked around and saw that they were in a small canyon with steep rock walls on 3 sides. A tiny stream trickled through the center, and Xavier was speaking with a man who had emerged from the shadows, someone Sarah had not noticed until that moment. "Easy," Xavier murmured as he felt her stiffen. "This is Miguel, one of my ranch hands. He's been watching for us." The man called Miguel was older, perhaps in his 50s, with weathered brown skin and kind, dark eyes. He nodded respectfully to Sarah. "Miss, we have coffee and some food if you're hungry. The boss said you might be coming through, though we did not expect him to bring company." Xavier helped Sarah dismount, and she had to bite back a gasp as her stiff legs protested the movement. She had been in the saddle for hours, and every muscle in her body seemed to have locked into place. Xavier noticed her discomfort and steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Give yourself a minute to get your legs back under you," he said. "Miguel, how are things back at the ranch?" "Quiet, no trouble. But there was a rider came through yesterday asking questions about settlers in the area. Apache, but friendly enough. Said his people had seen strange movements to the north, white men gathering in groups. Might be raiders or might be nothing, but he wanted us to know to be careful." Xavier's expression darkened. "Did he say which band he was from?" "Chiricahua. It was that young scout who sometimes trades with us, the one who speaks good English. He seemed genuinely concerned, boss." "All right. We'll rest here for a couple hours, let the horse breathe, and let Miss Whitmore get some food in her. And then we push on to the ranch. I want to be back before dawn." Miguel nodded and disappeared back into the shadows, returning a moment later with a tin cup of coffee that he pressed into Sarah's grateful hands. The coffee was strong and bitter, but it was hot, and Sarah felt strength flowing back into her limbs with each sip. Xavier busied himself tending to the horse, checking its hooves, and giving it water from the stream. Sarah watched him work, noting the easy confidence in his movements, the gentle way he spoke to the animal. There was something deeply attractive about a man who was competent at what he did, she realized. Something that made her feel safe in a way that had nothing to do with his physical strength. "You should eat something," Xavier said, settling down beside her with his own cup of coffee and a cloth bundle that contained hard biscuits and dried meat. "It's not fancy, but it will keep your strength up." Sarah accepted the food gratefully and ate in silence for a few minutes before asking, "This Miguel? And you mentioned other ranch hands. They live at your ranch?" "Miguel and his son Carlos. They've been with me for 6 years now, ever since they helped me track down some stolen cattle, good men both of them, and they know this country nearly as well as I do." Xavier paused, then added, "You'll be safe at the ranch, Miss Whitmore. I know you have no reason to trust me beyond my word, but I give you my word nonetheless. I'll get you to Santa Fe as soon as it's safe to travel, and in the meantime, you'll be treated with every respect." Sarah looked at him in the dim light from the small fire Miguel had built, seeing the earnest sincerity in his face. "I do trust you," she said quietly. "You could have ridden past me yesterday, left me there the same way the stagecoach driver did, but you stopped, and you helped me, and you have been nothing but kind despite the trouble I must be causing you. So, yes, Mr. Dalton, I trust you." Something shifted in Xavier's expression, a softening around his eyes that made him look younger and somehow more vulnerable. "Call me Xavier, please. We're well past formalities at this point." "Then you must call me Sarah." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face, and Sarah felt something warm unfurl in her chest. It was exhaustion, she told herself, nothing more than gratitude and relief manifesting as something that felt dangerously close to attraction. She was tired and frightened and clinging to the first solid thing she had found in this terrifying wilderness. That was all. But when Xavier reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair back from her face, his fingers rough but careful against her skin, Sarah could not quite convince herself that what she felt was only gratitude. They rested for 2 hours, and then Xavier declared it was time to move on. Sarah felt stronger after the food and coffee, though her body still ached from the long hours in the saddle. Miguel helped her mount, and then Xavier was behind her again, his presence solid and reassuring as they set off into the darkness. "Tell me about your ranch," Sarah said after they had been riding for a while. She needed to stay awake, needed something to focus on, besides the soreness of her muscles and the confusing tangle of emotions in her chest. "It's not much," Xavier said. "About 300 acres of decent grazing land in a valley between two mesas. We run maybe 100 head of cattle, some horses. There's a main house that my father built, solid adobe that stays cool in summer and warm in winter, a barn, a couple of outbuildings, a well that runs year-round, which is worth more than gold out here." "It sounds wonderful," Sarah said honestly. "Santa Fe seemed so far away when I left Fort Worth, like I was traveling to the edge of the world, but listening to you describe your ranch, I can almost picture it." "What made you want to become a school teacher way out here?" Xavier asked. "Surely there were positions available closer to wherever you came from." "Philadelphia," Sarah said. "And yes, there were positions available, but they were all in schools where children learned by rote memorization and harsh discipline, where imagination was crushed and questions were discouraged. I wanted something different. I wanted to teach somewhere that was still being shaped, where I could make a real difference." The advertisement for the Santa Fe position spoke of teaching children from all different backgrounds, of building something new. It appealed to me. "That's brave," Xavier said quietly. "Leaving everything you knew for an uncertain future in a place you had never been." "Or foolish," Sarah said with a small laugh. "My father certainly thought so. He wanted me to marry a banker's son and settle down to a proper Philadelphia life. We had quite the argument before I left." "Are you running from something or running toward something?" The question was perceptive, and Sarah took her time considering how to answer. "Both, I think. Running from a life that felt too small, too confined. Running toward the possibility of being more than what everyone expected me to be." Xavier was quiet for a long moment. And then he said, "I understand that. Sometimes the only way to find out who you really are is to leave behind everything that tells you who you're supposed to be." They rode on through the darkness, and Sarah found herself wanting to know more about this man who had appeared in her moment of greatest need. "Do you ever think about leaving? Going somewhere else? Starting over?" "Sometimes," Xavier admitted, "when the work is hard and the loneliness gets heavy. But this land gets into your blood. For all its harshness, there's a beauty to it that you can't find anywhere else. And the ranch is all I have left of my family, the last piece of my father's dream. I can't just walk away from that." Dawn was breaking when they finally crested a rise, and Sarah saw Xavier's ranch spread out in the valley below. He had been modest in his description. The main house was larger than she had expected, a solid structure with a covered porch and windows that caught the first rays of sunlight. The barn was well maintained, and she could see several horses in a nearby corral. Cattle grazed on the slopes of the valley, and everything had an air of careful tending that spoke of pride in ownership. "Welcome to the Dalton Ranch," Xavier said, and Sarah could hear the note of pride in his voice despite his attempt at nonchalance. They rode down into the valley, and as they approached the house, a younger man emerged from the barn. This must be Carlos, Sarah thought, seeing the family resemblance to Miguel in his features. He waved when he saw them and jogged over to help with the horse. "Father said you found someone," Carlos said, nodding respectfully to Sarah. "Welcome, miss. You look like you have had a hard journey." "That is putting it mildly," Sarah said, allowing Xavier to help her down from the horse. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and Xavier caught her easily, steadying her with his hands on her waist. "Easy. You have been in the saddle for almost 12 hours straight. Anyone would be unsteady." He kept one hand on her elbow as he guided her toward the house. "Let me show you to the guest room. You can rest, clean up, and I will have Miguel's wife Rosa bring you some proper food." The inside of the house was cool and surprisingly comfortable. The walls were thick adobe, and the furniture, while simple, was well made and cared for. Xavier led her down a short hallway to a bedroom that was clearly the finest in the house. It had a real bed with a quilted coverlet, a washstand with a basin and pitcher, and a window that looked out over the valley. "This was my sister's room," Xavier said quietly. "It's been empty since she passed, but Rosa keeps it clean and aired out. I think Emma would have liked knowing it was being used to help someone in need." Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes, overwhelmed by the kindness of this man who owed her nothing but was giving her everything. "Thank you," she whispered, "for all of this, for saving my life." Xavier looked uncomfortable with her gratitude, shifting his weight from one foot to the other. "Any decent person would have done the same. You rest now. I will check on you later." He left, closing the door softly behind him, and Sarah sank down onto the bed with a sigh of pure relief. The mattress was stuffed with something soft heaven compared to the rocky ground she had slept on for 2 nights, and the room smelled faintly of lavender and sunshine. She should get up, should wash her face and try to make herself presentable, but exhaustion was pulling at her like a tide, and within moments she had fallen into a deep, dreamless sleep. When Sarah woke, the sun was high in the sky and someone had placed a tray of food on the table beside the bed. There was fresh bread, soft cheese, sliced cold meat, and a pitcher of what looked like lemonade. Her stomach growled loudly at the sight, and she realized she could not remember the last time she had eaten a proper meal. She washed her face and hands in the basin, which someone had filled with clean water while she slept, and then fell upon the food with an enthusiasm that would have scandalized her Philadelphia relatives. Everything tasted incredible, probably because she was so hungry, but also because it was clear that someone had put care into the preparation. There was a soft knock at the door, and a woman's voice called, "Miss, are you awake?" "Yes, please come in," Sarah called back, hastily swallowing a mouthful of bread. The door opened to reveal a stout woman with graying hair and a warm smile. "I am Rosa, Miguel's wife. I hope the food is to your liking." "It is wonderful. Thank you so much," Sarah said sincerely, "and thank you for preparing the room for me. Everything is lovely." Rosa's smile widened. "It is good to have another woman in the house. Xavier, he is a good man, but he does not understand about the small comforts that make a house a home. I do what I can, but it is not the same." She came further into the room carrying a bundle of cloth. "I thought you might like some fresh clothes. These were Emma's, Xavier's sister. You look to be about the same size she was. Xavier said I should offer them to you if you need them." Sarah looked down at her traveling dress, which was stained with dust and sweat and generally ruined beyond repair. "I hate to impose further." "It is no imposition. Emma would want her things to be useful rather than sitting in a trunk gathering dust. And between us women, Xavier needs to let go of some of her belongings. He has kept everything exactly as she left it. And that is not healthy." Rosa set the bundle on the bed. There are dresses, undergarments, everything you might need. Take what you like. I will be in the kitchen if you need anything else." After Rosa left, Sarah examined the clothes she had brought. They were simple but well-made, practical garments suited to life on a ranch. She selected a cotton dress in a soft blue color and fresh undergarments, and using the water in the basin, she did her best to wash away the dust and grime of her ordeal in the desert. Clean and dressed in fresh clothes, Sarah felt almost human again. She ventured out of the bedroom, following the sound of voices to what turned out to be the kitchen. Rosa was there, working at a large table, and she looked up with approval when she saw Sarah. "Much better. That color suits you well. Now, you must still be tired, but Xavier asked if you felt up to joining him for the evening meal. He wants to discuss plans for getting you safely to Santa Fe." "Of course, Gissen," Sarah said. "Where might I find him?" "He's out checking the herd, but he will be back within the hour. You can wait in the main room if you like, or you can keep me company here while I prepare supper." Sarah chose to stay in the kitchen, finding Rosa's presence comforting after so many days of fear and uncertainty. She helped where she could, though Rosa insisted she was still a guest and should not be working. They talked as Rosa cooked, and Sarah learned that Rosa and Miguel had come north from Mexico 15 years ago, that Carlos was their only child, and that they considered Xavier as close as family. "He is a good man," Rosa said again. And Sarah was beginning to understand that this was high praise from the pragmatic woman. When his sister was sick, he rode for 2 days through a storm to fetch a doctor. The doctor could not save her, but Xavier did everything humanly possible. And he is fair to everyone who works for him, always pays on time, treats us with respect. Out here, that means more than you might think. "He certainly saved my life," Sarah said quietly. "I do not know what would have happened to me if he had not come along when he did." Rosa gave her a knowing look. The Blessed Virgin watches over fools and innocents, and she must have been watching over you. But she used Xavier as her instrument, and that is a blessing for both of you, I think. Before Sarah could ask what Rosa meant by that cryptic statement, the sound of boots on the porch announced Xavier's return. He came into the kitchen, his hat in his hands, and stopped short when he saw Sarah standing there in his sister's dress. Something flickered across his face, too quick for Sarah to read, but when he spoke, his voice was steady. "Miss Whitmore, you are looking much recovered. I hope you were able to rest. Please, I asked you to call me Sarah. And yes, I slept better than I have in days. Your home is very comfortable, and Rosa has been incredibly kind." "Rosa could mother the whole territory if we would let her," Xavier said with a small smile. "Are you feeling up to talking over supper? I have been thinking about the best way to get you to Santa Fe, and I want your input." They ate in the dining room, which was a simple space with a long wooden table and windows that looked out over the ranch. Miguel and Carlos joined them, along with Rosa, and Sarah found herself relaxing into the easy camaraderie of the group. They treated her as a guest, but not as an outsider, including her in their conversation and asking about her journey west with genuine interest. After the meal, Xavier suggested they step out onto the porch to talk privately. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink, and the air was finally beginning to cool from the day's intense heat. "I have been thinking about your situation," Xavier began, leaning against the porch railing. "Santa Fe is about 3 days' ride from here, 4 if we are cautious, but the main road is not safe right now. Not with Apache war parties active in the area. We would need to take a longer route, probably adding another 2 days to the journey." "We?" Sarah asked. "You would escort me yourself?" "I cannot send you with just Miguel or Carlos. They are good men. But if you ran into trouble, one man alone would not be enough protection, and I cannot spare both of them from the ranch for a week or more, so yes, I would take you myself." Sarah felt that warm flutter in her chest again, the one she had been trying to ignore. "That is a significant imposition on your time and your work." Xavier turned to look at her directly, and in the fading light his blue eyes seemed to glow. "Sarah, you were abandoned in the desert and left to die. I found you, and that makes you my responsibility until I know you are safe. It is not an imposition. It is the right thing to do." "When would we leave?" Sarah asked, pushing aside the complicated feelings his words stirred up. I need a couple of days to make arrangements for the ranch to make sure Miguel and Carlos have everything they need to keep things running smoothly while I am gone. That will also give you time to recover your strength fully. We would leave the day after tomorrow at first light. Sarah nodded slowly. 2 days. That seems reasonable, and I cannot thank you enough for everything you are doing. You can thank me by getting to Santa Fe safely and becoming the teacher those children need, Xavier said. That will be thanks enough. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars begin to appear in the darkening sky. Sarah found herself studying Xavier's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way his hair curled slightly at the nape of his neck where it brushed his collar. He was handsome in a rugged way, nothing like the refined gentleman she had known in Philadelphia, but there was something compelling about him that went far beyond mere physical appearance. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, catching her staring. Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks, but decided honesty was the best policy. "I was thinking that I am very glad you were the one who found me. I cannot imagine having gone through this experience with anyone else." Xavier's expression softened. "I am glad I found you too, even though the circumstances are terrible. Even though I hate that you went through something so frightening, I'm glad our paths crossed." The air between them seemed to thicken with unspoken words, with possibilities neither of them was quite ready to voice. Sarah knew she should step back, should maintain proper distance, but she found herself moving closer instead, drawn by something she did not fully understand. "Sarah?" Xavier said quietly, and there was a question in the way he said her name. "Yes? I need you to know that I will get you to Santa Fe safely. That is my first priority, my only priority. But I also need you to know that having you here, talking with you, getting to know you, it has reminded me that there is more to life than just work and responsibility. You have reminded me of that, and I am grateful." Sarah's heart was beating faster now, and she could feel the warmth of Xavier's body, even though they were not quite touching. "You have reminded me of something too. You have reminded me why I left Philadelphia, why I wanted to come west. Not just to teach, but to find something real, something honest. And you are the most honest person I have ever met." Xavier reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to move away if she wanted, and gently took her hand in his. His palm was calloused from years of ranch work, rough against her softer skin, but his touch was careful and warm. "We should both get some rest," he said, though he made no move to let go of her hand. "Long day tomorrow, and then we ride the day after." "Yes," Sarah agreed, but she did not pull away either. They stood there on the porch, hands clasped, until finally Xavier stepped back with what seemed like great reluctance. "Good night, Sarah. Sleep well." "Good night, Xavier." Sarah went back to her room, but sleep was a long time coming. She lay in the darkness, her hand still tingling from Xavier's touch, and tried to make sense of everything she was feeling. She barely knew this man. They had met under the most unusual circumstances imaginable. She was supposed to be going to Santa Fe to start her new life as a school teacher, not developing feelings for a rancher she had known for less than 2 days. But the heart, Sarah was learning, did not particularly care about logic or proper timing or sensible plans. The next 2 days passed in a strange blur of normalcy and anticipation. Sarah helped Rosa around the house, insisting that she needed to be useful rather than sitting idle. She learned to make tortillas, discovered that she had a knack for tending the kitchen garden, and spent long hours talking with Rosa about everything from cooking to the challenges of life in the desert. Xavier was often busy with ranch work, but he made time each day to check on her, to ask how she was feeling and whether she needed anything. Their conversations were carefully casual, both of them dancing around the tension that had sparked to life on the porch that first evening. But Sarah caught him watching her sometimes when he thought she was not looking, and she knew her own gaze followed him more often than was probably proper. On the evening before they were to leave for Santa Fe, Xavier asked Sarah to take a walk with him. They strolled through the valley as the sun set, and Xavier pointed out various features of his land, told her stories about growing up here, shared memories of his father and sister that made her laugh, and occasionally brought tears to her eyes. You really love this place, Sarah observed as they paused at the top of a small rise that overlooked the ranch buildings. It is home, Xavier said simply. The only real home I have ever known. But I will admit, these past couple of days, seeing it through your eyes, I have remembered why I fell in love with it in the first place. Sometimes you get so caught up in the daily work that you forget to appreciate what you have. I can understand that, Sarah said. Before I left Philadelphia, I was so focused on escaping, on getting away from the life my father had planned for me, that I forgot to appreciate the things that were good about it. My father and I parted on harsh words, and now I wish I had been kinder, had explained myself better. Do you regret leaving? Sarah thought about it carefully before answering. No, I regret the way I left, but not the leaving itself. I needed to find out who I could be on my own, away from everyone's expectations. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, Xavier said. I think that is one of the bravest things a person can do, actually. Choosing their own path even when it is hard, even when people they love do not understand. They walked back to the house in the gathering darkness, and when they reached the porch, Xavier turned to face her. Sarah, I want you to know that no matter what happens, no matter where life takes you after we reach Santa Fe, these days have meant something to me. You have meant something to me. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. You mean something to me too, Xavier, more than I probably should admit. Why should you not admit it? Because I am leaving, because I have a position waiting for me in Santa Fe, a whole new life planned out, because we barely know each other, and this is all happening too fast. Xavier stepped closer, and Sarah could see her own conflicted feelings reflected in his eyes. What if you did not leave? What if you stayed here instead? The question hung in the air between them, heavy with possibility and promise. Sarah wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being wanted to throw caution to the wind and tell him that yes, she would stay, that she would give up the teaching position she had traveled so far to claim and build a life here instead. But the practical part of her mind, the part that had gotten her this far, was screaming warnings. Xavier, I cannot make that decision right now. It is too much, too fast. I need time to think, to be sure. She saw the disappointment flash across his face, but he nodded. You are right. I am sorry for pushing. We will go to Santa Fe as planned, and you will take the position you came here for. And if, after you have had time to settle and think things through, you decide that maybe there is something worth exploring between us, well, Santa Fe is only a few days' ride away. And if I decide that teaching is where I'm meant to be, Sarah asked softly, then I will be happy for you, Xavier said. And she could hear that he meant it even though it clearly pained him. Your happiness matters more to me than my own desires. That is how I know what I feel for you is real. Sarah reached up and touched his cheek, feeling the rough stubble beneath her palm. You are an extraordinary man, Xavier Dalton. He covered her hand with his own, pressing it more firmly against his face. And you are an extraordinary woman, Sarah Whitmore. Now we should both get some rest. Long journey starting tomorrow. But instead of stepping back, instead of being sensible and practical, Sarah found herself rising up on her toes and pressing her lips to his. It was a brief kiss, chaste and sweet, but it sent electricity racing through her entire body. When she pulled back, Xavier was staring at her with wonder in his eyes. What was that for? For saving my life, for being kind and patient and good, for reminding me that there are still decent men in the world. Sarah smiled up at him. And because I wanted to. Xavier laughed, a rich sound full of joy and surprise. Well, if we are doing things because we want to. He cupped her face in his hands and kissed her properly, thoroughly, with a passion that made Sarah's knees go weak. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sarah said shakily, we really should get some rest. Yes, Xavier agreed, but he stole one more quick kiss before finally, reluctantly, letting her go. Sarah barely slept that night, her mind racing with thoughts of Xavier, of the kiss they had shared, of the impossible choice she was facing. She had spent so long planning her escape from Philadelphia, so long imagining her life as a teacher in Santa Fe, and now suddenly there was this completely unexpected option. This chance at something she had not even known she wanted. They left at dawn, Sarah riding in front of Xavier on his horse just as she had on that first desperate journey to the ranch, but this time everything was different. This time she leaned back into his embrace without hesitation, and his arms around her felt like home in a way that no place ever had before. The journey to Santa Fe took 5 days, as Xavier had predicted. They traveled slowly and carefully, taking routes that avoided the main roads and the areas where Apache war parties had been spotted. They camped at night in sheltered spots that Xavier knew from years of traveling these lands, and they talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's stories and dreams and fears. On the third night, as they sat by their campfire under a canopy of stars so bright it seemed impossible, Xavier said quietly, "Tell me about the life you imagine for yourself in Santa Fe." Sarah thought about how to answer. "I imagined a small schoolhouse with children of all ages and backgrounds. I imagined teaching them not just reading and arithmetic, but how to think for themselves, how to question and explore and imagine. I thought about the difference I could make in their lives, the futures I could help open up for them." She paused, then added, "But I also imagined being alone. I thought that was the price of independence, that choosing my own path meant giving up the possibility of sharing my life with someone." "It does not have to be that way," Xavier said. "You could teach and still have a partner, still have a family of your own someday." "I know that now," Sarah said softly. "I did not know it before I met you." Xavier was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Then he said, "Well, what if there was a way to have both? What if you could teach and still be close to the ranch?" "What do you mean?" "There is a town about 20 miles from my ranch, a small place called Socorro. They have been trying to hire a teacher for almost 2 years now, but no one wants to come out this far. What if you taught there instead of Santa Fe?" Sarah's heart started beating faster. "Xavier, are you asking what I think you are asking?" He turned to look at her, and in the firelight his blue eyes were intense. "I am saying that if you wanted to take the position in Socorro instead of Santa Fe, you would be close enough that I could court you properly. We could take our time, get to know each other without the pressure of distance between us. And if things worked out the way I hope they will, well, a 20-mile ride to the schoolhouse is very manageable." "You would want to court me? Properly?" Xavier reached out and took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Sarah, I know it has only been a week since we met. I know that is not nearly enough time to be sure about someone, but I also know that I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. You are smart and brave and kind, and you make me laugh. And when I think about the future, I want you in it. So yes, I would very much like to court you properly, if you are willing." Sarah felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears. "What about the position in Santa Fe? They are expecting me." "We will go to Santa Fe as planned. You will explain the situation and ask if they can help you get in touch with the Socorro Town Council instead. It might not work out. They might insist you honor your commitment to them. But if there is a chance, even a small one, that we could make this work, don't you think it is worth trying?" Sarah thought about the careful plans she had made, the life she had imagined for herself. And then she thought about the past week, about laughter around Rosa's kitchen table, and Xavier's arms strong around her as they rode, and the kiss they had shared on the porch. She thought about the possibility of building something real and lasting with this good man, of having both the independence she craved and the partnership she had not known she wanted. "Yes," she said finally. "Yes, it is worth trying." Xavier's smile could have lit up the entire desert. He pulled her close and kissed her, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she was making the right choice. They reached Santa Fe 2 days later, and Sarah was struck by how foreign it felt despite having spent so long planning to live there. The town was larger than she had expected, busy and loud and full of strangers. Xavier helped her down from the horse, and they made their way to the address she had been given for the school board chairman. Mr. Harrison was a portly man with a stern expression that softened slightly when Sarah explained her situation. "So you are telling me that you wish to break your contract before you have even begun?" "I am asking if there might be another option," Sarah said, keeping her voice steady and professional. "I understand that Socorro has been seeking a teacher. If I could take that position instead, I would still be fulfilling my commitment to teach in the New Mexico territory, just in a different location." Mr. Harrison frowned, clearly displeased, but after a long moment he said, "It is true that we have had difficulty finding anyone willing to go to Socorro. Too remote, they all say. Are you certain you understand what you would be agreeing to? It is a very small town, very isolated." "I understand perfectly," Sarah said, "and I believe I am well suited to the challenges of teaching in a remote location." Xavier, who had been standing quietly beside her, spoke up. "If it helps. Sir, I can vouch for Miss Whitmore's character and determination. She has already survived being abandoned in Apache territory and made a 5-day journey through some of the harshest country in the territory without complaint. She is more than capable of handling Socorro." Mr. Harrison looked between them, and Sarah saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "I see. Well, this is highly irregular, but given our difficulties in filling the Socorro position, I suppose I can agree to the change. You will still need to sign a contract committing to at least 1 full year of teaching, and the pay will be slightly less than what we offered for the Santa Fe position." "That is acceptable," Sarah said quickly, relief flooding through her. The paperwork took the rest of the afternoon, but by evening it was done. Sarah was officially the new school teacher for Socorro, with her position to begin in 3 weeks' time. That would give her time to return to the ranch with Xavier, to make the journey to Socorro and find lodging to prepare for her new role. They stayed the night in a respectable boarding house, in separate rooms, of course, and the next morning they began the journey back to the ranch. Sarah felt lighter than she had in months, as if a weight she had not realized she was carrying had been lifted from her shoulders. "Are you happy?" Xavier asked as they rode, his voice soft against her ear. "I am terrified," Sarah admitted, "but yes, I am also very happy." "Good, because I intend to spend the next few weeks courting you so thoroughly that you will never doubt you made the right choice." And he did. The 3 weeks before Sarah had to leave for Socorro were some of the happiest of her life. Xavier taught her to ride properly, to handle a horse with confidence rather than fear. They explored the valley together, and he showed her the secret places he had loved as a boy: a hidden waterfall, a grove of cottonwood trees that turned gold in the autumn, a viewpoint where you could see for miles in every direction. They talked endlessly about everything and nothing. Sarah learned that Xavier loved poetry but was embarrassed to admit it, that he had a gift for mathematics that had helped him turn his struggling ranch into a profitable enterprise, that he still sometimes dreamed about his sister and woke up sad. Xavier learned that Sarah could sing beautifully, but only when she thought no one was listening, that she had a fierce, stubborn streak that came out when she believed she was right about something, that she loved thunderstorms and hated snakes with equal passion. They kissed often, stolen moments of passion that left them both breathless and wanting more, but Xavier was always careful to maintain propriety. "When I make you mine completely," he told her one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, "it will be as my wife, with no shame or secrecy." "Is that a proposal, Mr. Dalton?" Sarah teased. "Not yet," Xavier said seriously. "When I propose, you will know it. But soon, Sarah, if you are still certain this is what you want. Then very soon." The day came when Sarah had to leave for Socorro to take up her teaching position. Xavier, Miguel, and Carlos escorted her, pulling a wagon loaded with her belongings, including the trunk that Xavier had gone back to retrieve from where it had been abandoned in the desert. Amazingly, it was still there, unmolested, though covered in dust and sand. Socorro was indeed small, barely more than a cluster of buildings around a dusty main street, but the schoolhouse was solid and well-maintained. The town council had arranged for Sarah to board with a family named the Hendersons, who had 3 children of their own and welcomed Sarah warmly. Xavier helped her move her things into the small room off the back of the Henderson house, and then they stood awkwardly in the doorway, neither wanting to say goodbye. "It is only 20 miles," Xavier said. "I will visit every Sunday if you will have me." "I will count the days," Sarah said softly. He kissed her then, in front of God and the Hendersons and anyone else who might be watching, a kiss full of promise and longing. "Teach those children well," he said when they finally broke apart, "and remember that you have someone waiting for you, someone who loves you more than he thought possible." Sarah's breath caught. It was the first time either of them had said the word love out loud. "You love me?" "With everything I am," Xavier said simply. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other for a few weeks, but yes, Sarah Whitmore, I love you." "I love you too," Sarah whispered, and saw joy transform his face. The next few months fell into a pattern. Sarah threw herself into teaching, quickly winning over her students with her enthusiasm and innovative methods. The children of Socorro ranged from 6 to 14 years old, came from families of miners and ranchers and merchants, and were hungry for knowledge in a way that thrilled her. True to his word, Xavier rode into town every Sunday. They would spend the day together, walking and talking and stealing kisses when they could. He told her about life on the ranch, about the challenges of the changing seasons and the small victories of everyday work. She told him about her students, about the progress they were making and the frustrations of teaching with limited resources. On Christmas Eve, 6 months after they had first met, Xavier arrived in Socorro with a wagon full of supplies and a nervous expression that made Sarah's heart race. They went for a walk to their favorite spot, a small hill overlooking the town, and as the sun set in a blaze of color, Xavier got down on one knee. "Sarah Whitmore, you have made me happier than I ever thought I could be. You have brought light and laughter back into my life, and I cannot imagine facing another day without you by my side. Would you do me the incredible honor of becoming my wife?" He pulled out a ring, a simple band with a small blue stone that matched his eyes, and Sarah realized she was crying. "Yes," she said through her tears. "Yes, Xavier, I will marry you." He stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around while she laughed and cried at the same time. When he finally set her down, he slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her with a passion that made her knees weak. They were married in Socorro on a sunny day in March 1883, 7 months after that terrifying day when the stagecoach driver had abandoned Sarah in the desert. The town turned out in force for the wedding, and Miguel and Rosa and Carlos made the journey from the ranch. Rosa cried through the entire ceremony, and even Miguel's eyes were suspiciously bright. Sarah wore a dress that Rosa had helped her make, white cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs, simple but beautiful. Xavier wore his best suit, and when he saw Sarah walking toward him, the look of pure love and awe on his face made her forget to be nervous. They spoke their vows in front of the tiny Socorro church, promising to love and honor each other through whatever life might bring. And when the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier kissed her like a drowning man finding air, and Sarah knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. They spent their wedding night in the small hotel Socorro boasted, a modest establishment but clean and comfortable. Xavier was gentle and patient, and when Sarah finally fell asleep in his arms hours later, she felt more complete than she had ever imagined possible. Sarah continued teaching through the end of the school year, fulfilling her contract, but she and Xavier had already discussed their plans. They would build a small house on the ranch for starting their family, close enough to the main house that Rosa could help when needed, but far enough to give them privacy. And Sarah would continue to teach, though perhaps only part-time once children came, because her work was important to her and Xavier understood that. The summer after their wedding, they broke ground on the new house. It was small but well-designed, with a bedroom and a main room that could serve as both kitchen and living space, and a porch that looked out over the valley. Xavier did most of the work himself with help from Miguel and Carlos, and Sarah watched the house take shape with a sense of wonder and excitement. They moved in on a hot day in August, exactly 1 year after the day they had met, And that night, as they lay together in their own bed in their own house, Sarah said softly, "Do you ever think about how different things could have been? If that stagecoach driver had not abandoned me, if you had ridden past that spot an hour earlier or later, if 1,000 small things had been just slightly different?" Xavier pulled her closer, his hand tracing lazy patterns on her back. "I think about it sometimes. And then I thank God that everything happened exactly as it did because it brought you to me." "I was so angry at that driver for so long," Sarah admitted. "I thought he was the worst kind of coward, leaving me there to die. But now I almost want to thank him. If he had taken me all the way to Santa Fe, I would never have met you." "Well, I'm not quite ready to thank him," Xavier said dryly. He still left a helpless woman in the middle of Apache territory. That was unconscionable regardless of the outcome. "But I understand what you mean. Strange how the worst moments of our lives can sometimes lead to the best things." Sarah was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Xavier, I think I might be pregnant." She felt him go still beside her. "Truly?" "I am not certain yet, but I think so. I wanted to wait to tell you until I was sure, but I cannot keep secrets from you." Xavier let out a whoop of joy and rolled her onto her back, kissing her face all over until she was laughing and breathless. "A baby! Sarah, we are going to have a baby." "Possibly," Sarah cautioned, but she could not keep the smile off her face. "Do not get too excited yet." But Xavier was already excited, and over the next few weeks, as Sarah became more certain of her condition, his excitement only grew. He became ridiculously protective, barely wanting to let her out of his sight, trying to insist she stop doing any kind of work at all until Rosa finally took him aside and explained that pregnant women were not made of glass. Their son was born in April 1884, a healthy baby boy with his mother's dark hair and his father's blue eyes. They named him Matthew after Xavier's father, and Sarah thought she had never seen Xavier happier than when he held his son for the first time, tears streaming down his face as he whispered promises about the life they would build together. Sarah took a year away from teaching to care for Matthew, but when he was old enough, she returned to the schoolhouse part-time, bringing Matthew with her. The students adored having a baby in the classroom, and Sarah found that motherhood had made her an even better teacher, more patient, and understanding of the challenges her students faced. 2 years after Matthew was born, Sarah gave birth to a daughter they named Emma, after Xavier's sister. She had her father's blue eyes and a smile that could light up the entire ranch. Xavier was utterly wrapped around her tiny finger from the moment she was born, and Sarah often joked that he would spoil her rotten. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered under Xavier's management, and they expanded the herd and the land holdings. Sarah continued to teach, making a difference in the lives of countless children over the years. Matthew and Emma grew up strong and healthy, learning to love the desert the way their father did, learning to value education and kindness the way their mother did. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Sarah back to the spot where he had first found her, abandoned and afraid in the middle of Apache territory. It looked different now in the late afternoon light. Less threatening somehow, but Sarah still felt a shiver run through her when she remembered how desperate she had been. "I never told you this," Xavier said as they stood there together, "but when I first saw you standing there, something in my chest just seized up. I thought you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, even covered in dust and obviously terrified, and I remember thinking that I would do anything, absolutely anything, to make sure you were safe." "I thought you were going to ride past me," Sarah admitted. "For just a moment, I thought you would decide I was not worth the trouble and just keep going. And then you stopped, and you looked at me, and I knew I would be all right." Xavier pulled her close. "Best decision I ever made, stopping for you that day. Best thing that ever happened to me." "We both got lucky," Sarah said softly. "I got saved from a terrible situation, and I found the love of my life. You got a wife who appreciates you and loves you and is not afraid of hard work." "I got so much more than that," Xavier said. "I got a partner, a true partner in every sense of the word." Someone who challenges me and supports me and makes me want to be better. Someone who gave me children I adore and a life I never dared to dream about. Sarah, you are my everything." They stood there as the sun set, wrapped in each other's arms, and Sarah thought about the long, strange journey that had brought her here. She thought about the frightened young woman who had left Philadelphia looking for independence and purpose. She thought about the terrifying days in the desert, the fear and desperation and certainty that she was going to die. And then she thought about everything that had come after, the love she had found with Xavier, the family they had built together, the life of meaning and purpose she had created, the students she had taught, the difference she had made in her small corner of the world, the home she had made in this harsh, beautiful land that she had come to love as much as Xavier did. "What are you thinking?" Xavier asked, sensing the turn of her thoughts. "I am thinking that I would not change a single thing," Sarah said. "Not the fear or the pain or even being abandoned in the middle of nowhere, because all of it, every single moment, led me here, led me to you. And that makes it all worthwhile." Xavier kissed her then, soft and sweet, and Sarah felt the same spark she had felt on that first kiss on the porch so many years ago. Some things she thought never changed. The love between them had only grown deeper and stronger with time, tempered by the challenges they had faced together and sweetened by the joys they had shared. They had 2 more children over the years, another son and another daughter, and Sarah continued to teach until she was well into her 50s. The Dalton Ranch became known throughout the territory as a place of fair dealing and honest work, and Xavier's reputation as a good man spread far and wide. Matthew grew up to take over the ranch when Xavier decided it was time to step back, and he ran it with the same integrity and care his father had shown. Emma became a teacher like her mother, opening a school in a nearby town and inspiring a new generation of students. Their other children found their own paths, but they all stayed close, bound together by the strong foundation of love and respect their parents had built. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Xavier stood up to make a toast. His hair was gray now, and there were deep lines around his eyes. But when he looked at Sarah, his blue eyes were as bright and full of love as they had been that first day in the desert. 40 years ago, he said, his voice still strong despite his age, I went out looking for stray cattle and found the greatest treasure of my life instead. Sarah, you have made every single day of these 40 years an adventure and a blessing. You have been my partner, my best friend, my love, and my home. Here is to 40 more years, and to the incredible journey we have shared. Sarah felt tears on her cheeks as she raised her glass. Around them, their family cheered and applauded, but all she could see was Xavier, the man who had saved her life and then given her a reason to live it fully. "To us," she said softly, and he reached across the table to take her hand. "To us?" he agreed. Later that night, as they prepared for bed in the house they had built together so many years ago, Sarah stood at the window looking out over the valley. The ranch was quiet, everyone else having returned to their own homes, and the stars were brilliant overhead. Xavier came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her back against his chest. "What are you looking at?" "Everything," Sarah said. "Our life, our family, this beautiful place we have built together. I am looking at everything and feeling grateful for all of it." "Even the hard parts?" Xavier asked. "Even the years when money was tight and we did not know if we would make it through the winter? Even the times we fought and could barely stand to be in the same room?" "Even those," Sarah said firmly, "because we got through them together, and each challenge we faced made us stronger. This life has not always been easy, Xavier, but it has always been worth it." He turned her around to face him, and in the moonlight coming through the window, she could see the deep love in his expression. "I have never regretted a single moment," he said. "Not one. Every day with you has been a gift." They stood there in the quiet of their bedroom, holding each other close. And Sarah thought about the young woman she had been when she first came west. That woman had been looking for independence and purpose. for a chance to prove herself and make a difference in the world, and she had found all of that and so much more. She had found love in the most unexpected place, with a man who had appeared when she needed him most and had never left her side since. She had found a home in a harsh land that had seemed terrifying at first, but had revealed its beauty slowly, patiently, until she could not imagine living anywhere else. She had found purpose not just in teaching, but in building a life and a family, in being part of something larger than herself. The stagecoach driver who had abandoned her in Apache territory had meant to leave her to die. Instead, he had inadvertently given her the greatest gift of her life, because being left alone in that vast desert had led her directly to Xavier. It was strange how life worked sometimes, how the worst moments could transform into the best ones, how apparent tragedy could become unexpected blessing. "What are you thinking about now?" Xavier asked, knowing her mood so well after all these years. "I am thinking about that stagecoach driver," Sarah said, "and about how I forgave him a long time ago, more than forgave him, actually, because without his cowardice, I would never have met you. I would have gone to Santa Fe and become a teacher there, and you would have stayed here on your ranch, and we would never have known what we were missing." "Fate," Xavier said thoughtfully, "or providence, or just dumb luck. Whatever you want to call it, I am grateful for it." "So am I," Sarah said. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the familiar contours that were as dear to her as her own. "I love you, Xavier Dalton. After 40 years, I love you even more than I did the day we married." "And I love you, Sarah Dalton. You are my heart, my home, my everything." They kissed, a kiss that held 40 years of love and commitment and shared joy and weathered sorrows. And then they went to bed, wrapped in each other's arms, the way they had been every night for 4 decades. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built a life together that was richer and fuller than either of them could have imagined. Outside, the desert was quiet under the star-filled sky. Somewhere out there in the vast emptiness was the spot where a frightened young woman had once stood alone, abandoned and terrified, convinced her life was ending. But it had not been an ending at all. It had been a beginning. The start of a love story that would span decades and touch countless lives, a testament to the power of courage and kindness and the unexpected ways that fate brings people together. The Dalton Ranch would continue for generations, a legacy of hard work and integrity passed down through Xavier and Sarah's children and their children's children. The schoolhouse in Socorro would bear a plaque in Sarah's honor, commemorating the teacher who had inspired so many students to dream bigger and reach higher. And the story of how Xavier had found Sarah abandoned in Apache territory and brought her home would be told and retold, becoming the stuff of family legend. A reminder that sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin in the most unlikely ways. As Sarah drifted off to sleep that night, secure in Xavier's arms, she felt nothing but peace and contentment. She had lived a good life, a full life, a life of purpose and meaning and deep abiding love. She had made a difference in the world, had touched lives, and been touched in return. She had raised children who were good and strong and kind. And through it all, she had had Xavier by her side, her partner and her love, the man who had saved her life, and then spent the rest of his own, making sure she knew how precious she was. It was more than she had ever dreamed of when she left Philadelphia all those years ago. It was more than she had hoped for when she set out for Santa Fe to become a teacher. It was quite simply everything. And as she slipped into sleep, Sarah's last thought was one of profound gratitude for the unexpected journey that had brought her here, to this moment, to this life, to this love that would last forever.